I'll start with a question. How many of you have not set up GA4 at all on your website? Handful of hands here, okay. And of those who have, how many of you have actually set up all your custom event tracking? Okay. And unlike Gray, I don't really have a booming voice, so this does require a little bit more air out of me. But like Gray mentioned, when we are looking at GA4, there is no view. So when we go and create a new property for GA4, all you'll be doing is creating a new property. You will do this in the same interface as you are used to with Google Analytics or with Universal Analytics. And what you need to do is just click this gray button right here that says Create Property, and this will kind of get you started. From there, you have to install tracking code on your website. So there are two primary ways you can do this. You can either do it with Google Tag Manager, which is our recommended way to install it, and by and large, the majority of what we see people do. This will give you a lot more acute control over your tracking on your website. Or you can use a G tag. And if you use a G tag, you have to rely on a developer more so to install that code directly on every page of your website and then create JavaScript events when events need to fire off. So that can take a little bit more back-end dev work than Google Tag Manager does. But I'm going to actually cover quite a bit in Google Tag Manager because we use these things so directly together.
And this is that's not just a Miles thing.
I think
everybody agrees on that. Yeah.
I think everybody agrees on it.
We do Tag Manager as well for all of our events.
And almost tags are also super confusing because you can technically install GA4 through an AdWords tag, a floodlight tag. Yeah. Google Tag Manager is the way to go.
Yeah, agreed. So what it will describe for you to do here once you go into Google Tag Manager is to paste this first snippet here in the heading of your HTML, or the head, and it will tell you to paste this second piece directly when the body opens. If you're not a developer, you're not going to have access or really know how to do that, and frankly, maybe shouldn't be messing around with pasting JavaScript files in places that you're not aware of. However, most CMS platforms these days actually have fields for installing GTM. So there might be a plugin for it. If you're using WordPress, there's a plugin for it. If you're using Drupal, there's a module for it. Most smaller CMS platforms like Squarespace, Shopify, etc., they have fields for snippets of code or scripts that you can just drop the code right into that. And that makes it a little bit safer for anybody to install that code without wiping out the entire website in the process. Which, yeah, I think maybe we've all been guilty of at one point or another. So, in order to get your Google Analytics 4 set up on your website via Google Tag Manager, we need to go into both platforms. We need to create a new tag here in Google Tag Manager, so you can see. Would I push the top button and I can highlight? There we go. Okay, so you can create a new tag here, and it will give you a handful of options. That's weird, it's kind of offset. And so there's a lot of what they call templates or default options for Tag Manager. And if you're using Google products or a lot of major platforms, you'll actually have a template. So you can just input the values directly and you don't have to deal with any sort of script. And so luckily we have that for GA4 configurations, and you go in and you create a new tag there. Then in your stream details here in GA4, you're going to grab your measurement ID. So you're going to plug that measurement ID in right here in this field that says measurement ID and save your tag.
You will get a copy of this deck, by the way.
Yes. You'll get a copy of the deck. This is actually the simple part, and then we'll get into events, which becomes less simple and more dependent on your own custom setup. The final thing we have to do, and I don't know if I should back up and say, like in Google Tag Manager, we have three primary components. We have tags, we have triggers, and we have variables that we work with.
That's for the GT Masterclass. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's important here because we have to create a tag, and then we have to create a condition on which this tag fires. Because this is the configuration tag for our GA4, it just fires on all page views, which is a default trigger here. So you don't have to create any fancy triggers. Then you hit save. And what you need to do, basically anytime you publish any tag, is go up here into the preview. Oh God, I'm not using this remote correctly. Here we go. Up here in the preview tag, you're going to put in your domain or your website here, and you're going to hit connect. Because this is a page view tag, all I need is for it to load one single page to make sure that it's firing. Now, what I would do, or what I would recommend doing for the GA4 tag is checking all of your different page types directly or independently so that you can make sure that there's nothing blocking. If you have, really fun, fancy scripts on one page template and not another, just make sure there's no interference there. But basically go in and connect to the Google Tag Assistant using the preview, put in your domain, and hit connect. It will bring you to your website. It's going to open it in a little window, and you'll see this little modal here floating above that says Tag Assistant has connected to your website. So you know that it is following you around as you browse your site. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to hit finish because all I'm doing is setting up a page view tag. Then you'll get a summary of all of the tags that have fired and what the different events are that have happened during your session on the site. And I can see here that my analytics base tag has actually fired 3 times, meaning that I've visited 3 different pages on the website, so I know that my tag is installed correctly. And so from there, we can get into the fun part, because that's just getting it basic setup. Like, that's only going to show you your most basic out-of-the-box tracking on your site, and like we've been discussing, there is so much more value in all of the different events that's where we need to spend our time. So event tracking, this guy obviously visited one of the events at one of our DMOs, and he's really excited about it. So I feel like I'm kind of being redundant here, but I think for the sake of clarity, we'll go through it again. So event tracking will help track specific actions people take on your website. For example, a button click, form submission, or a guide order. The parameters allow you to collect the information related to that event that was completed. For example, a referring URL, maybe the color of the button, or the name of the guide that they actually ordered. Because GA4 has a flexible event parameter schema, you get to define this on your own. And that is why we are here to help, because when we were first playing around with GA4 prior to forming Team Smiles, we were all over the place, and we made up event parameters that we thought made sense, but maybe Paul wasn't using them at Simpleview. And so while they are very flexible, we do think for a lot of our primary events like outbound clicks, partner referrals, guide orders, let us define that for you so you're not just making things up along the way. Because it's really easy to do, and then if you change the name or anything, you're going to start messing with your data. Something I recommend doing is using the parameters instead of creating multiple events. With events and conversions, you do have limits with how many you can create. And what I have kind of gotten into or what I've found is a lot of folks will have an event or a conversion that is the fishing guide download, and that's an event. And the family fun download, that's an event. And you're now starting to create multiple events and kind of whittle away at those limits. But because we have parameters, we don't need to do that. We can collect information about those specific events so that we don't have to fire off individual event types or events and eat away at those limits, and it just creates a lot more data, and it makes a lot more sense that way. So now we've installed our page view tag or our configuration tag. Now we need to go in and do a very similar process. So we're going to go in and we are going to find the template for Google Analytics GA4 event. Again, we need to insert our measurement ID. Fortunately, because you've already set this up, there'll actually just be a drop down, and so you can just select the ID or the configuration that you've already set up. So you don't have to go in and paste that in every time. And so that makes it a little bit nicer. Then you're going to define an event name. You'll see that the name of the tag may not be in the same format as the event name. The event name is what gets passed through into Google Analytics. The tag name is what we just have as a reference in Google Tag Manager. So they may not be exactly the same. I do recommend doing them as similar as possible so you don't get lost. Then we can define a couple parameters. So for the sake of this, we use the guide name as a parameter, and we're pulling that in via a variable. And again, setting up the variables and all that, that's probably the GTM Masterclass. But we might want to pull in the name of the guide, and then the click URL. So these guides probably live at different URLs. If we are looking at a digital guide, for instance, they're going to have some sort of unique string. And that just gives us a little bit more information about where that guide lived. So now we get to set the parameters, the conditions on which these guides or these tags fire. The more specific you can get with these conditions, oftentimes the better. But if you are, again, using your parameters here to pull in information, then it may need to be a little bit more broad. So you do pick up everything that fits those parameters. So in this case, I want to track a click URL that contains bluetoad.com. A lot of our virtual guides are hosted on Bluetoad, and I know if somebody clicks out into Bluetoad, they're probably visiting an online guide. I'm going to just make it more specific, though. I'm looking for people who actually clicked our View Guide button, and it needs to be on our /guides page. You may have digital guides or other assets on Bluetoad that are not actually guides, and maybe it's a meeting planning guide, and you're trying to separate that out from the consumer or tourism guide. So I might also create a condition that says it has to fire on this specific page, people going out to this URL when they click a button that says View Guide. When all of those conditions are met, my tag fires off, it collects the information in our GA4 event tag, and it sends it into Google Analytics 4. Now, when you first set these up, you're probably not going to see them in your Google Analytics 4 reporting for somewhere between 24 to 48 hours. So just because you're not seeing it in GA4 doesn't mean it's not working. There is a live report that you can look at, and you'll see the events kind of getting tracked in the live report, but it won't show up in the standard report. So know that. Also, that's why we use the debugger tool to make sure that things are firing, because you just won't always see it collecting immediately. I'm going to just briefly touch on the variables because this is where it can get extremely complicated very quickly. So you have a list of built-in variables in Tag Manager, and a lot of these are great and you can use right out of the box here. So it could be the click text that somebody clicks on, the click ID of the actual element, the click element. This is going to start spitting out like HTML that might not be as useful for you. But you kind of get the picture here. There's a bunch of built-in variables. Then you can also create your own custom variables. And that's where we like to have a lot of fun here at Team Smiles, is by creating custom variables that do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. But in this instance, I wanted to pull in a custom parameter called blog author, because I might want to look in my GA4, and we might want to create a reward system because we have authors all over the state who contribute to our DMO site. And we want to reward them by those who bring in the most traffic to our site or have the best engagement. By using these custom variables now, I can pull the blog author's name right off the website and put it using this nice CSS selector here. It's very fun. You can div field name, blog author, etc. Pull that into your analytics, and now I can actually have a custom dimension based on the blog author. And so I think that that's pretty cool and could be a nice way to look at analytics. Then we have all of our events set up and configured. We've done this a million times with a bunch of events. We figured out everything, and we need to go figure out which of those events get turned into conversions. And so I think Gray's already done a great job of explaining what the difference is between events and conversions, but you just go in here and you toggle which ones you want to be conversions.
And that works going forward.
Correct.
Yeah. Not historically.
Some things are retroactive. That is not one of them, unfortunately.
All right, so just kind of to reiterate metrics and dimensions, metrics are quantitative. There's a quantity. It is something that you count. I'm not going to read all of these off. Dimensions refer to something qualitative, and so this describes the data that you're looking at. They sound so similar, I think a lot of folks get them all mixed up, so we're just going to touch on that again. This is something that changed in Google Analytics 4, which has been very fun for me also. When it first launched, we got to create custom events in the UI. Now we get to create custom metrics or custom dimensions to align with the events and dimensions that you've set up in Google Tag Manager. So you have to set these up in two places if you want to see this data come through in the user interface. Fortunately, you can actually name the metric something that is a little bit more legible by a human, virtual guide views, versus using this underscore case that we're using here for the event parameter. You basically say, if an event with this name comes through, that becomes a new metric we can look at. So we are now counting guide order or guide views on this one. And we're just going to use a standard unit of measurement. You'll use a standard unit for the most part, unless you're counting things like dollars spent. If it's e-commerce, it might be a little different. But standard event just assigns a single value. You count it one time every time that happens. Then we have to set up our custom dimensions. And so for this,
Are the parameters.
which are the parameters. So dimensions and parameters are like the same thing, basically. So for this one, I want to know what the guide name is. And I'm saying if an event comes through and it has this parameter guide name, then now we have a new dimension in the UI that we can use. If we don't set these up, you're not going to see this reported in the UI at all. You can be tracking it in, or sending the data through in Tag Manager, but you're not going to be able to actually view it in Google Analytics 4.
This is my least favorite part of GA4.
Mine too.
Because you have to do the work, and then you have to go back the next day and remember to do the work again.
Yes.
Because you can't do it at the same time.
Make sure you didn't type it wrong.
Correct. So
Yeah.
this is the worst part, by far.
Yeah, you have to do everything twice at least. All right, then we can use events now to start defining custom audiences, which is really cool actually. So for this case, this is like a default example from Google, but if the event that is view search results, you can't see it, because again, everything gets cut off and everything is very difficult to read in GA4. But it says view search results, and that when somebody has completed that event, they get thrown into the audience of searchers. So now you can do things like create like custom audiences based around people who have already downloaded your guide or people who have submitted an RFP, and you can put them into little audience segments that way. Now, what's really cool about this is when you link your Google Analytics 4 account to Google Ads, you can actually push those custom audiences into Google Ads and use that as part of your Google Ads targeting, which makes your ad targeting so much more effective because now you have all of this real user behavior from your website pushed back into Google Ads.
And same with Campaign Manager.
And same with Campaign Manager and most of the products that you can link to the platform.